What's your favorite "wow, I didn't see that one coming" from a relative/friend? Story 1. When my uncle had a heart attack and both his wife and girlfriend turned up to see him. Turns out for 30 years he told the wife he was working away during the week but staying with girlfriend. And told the girlfriend he worked weekends, which is when he stayed with his wife and 2 kids. 30 years. Edit. Forgot to add he divorced his wife and married the girlfriend. Story 2. My great-grandfather and his 2 brothers went to prison, and not college, for 4 years for robbing trains. They had sold the family dairy farm just a couple years before the Great Depression and started a general store. They were all late teens/early 20s with multiple kids each already. But during the Depression, Kraft Cheese started sending super cheap fake cheese and other dairy products into the area, undercutting all the local dairies. My grandpa and his brothers realized that they still depended on the local dairy industry as customers, so they robbed the trains of all the Kraft cheese and threw it into fields to rot. A reporter from Chicago was on one of the trains and got a picture of their faces. And they all went to college for a few years. The local law just couldn't seem to catch the bandits that were trying to save the town economy. When I graduated college, my grandmother said I was the first in the family. I asked what about great-grandpa, and she said, "Oh no, he went to prison, not college." But no one else in the family ever knew either, lol. When they got out, they were all voted in as town councilmen. Literally had customers for life. My great-grandmother ran the store while they were in prison, and she went on to run it until she retired at 93 years old. Great-grandpa had died in his 60s. Edit to add, Mom says the reporter from Chicago probably worked for Kraft because that's where the parent company was from. And only one brother actually got his face caught on camera, but the other 2 confessed to get him a lighter sentence. And my great-grandmother was adamant that my great-great-uncle did not roll over on his brothers. The other brothers decided to broker a deal for a reduced sentence. Second edit. It was my great-grandfather and his 2 brother-in-laws. They went to college in Texas, and they did it to support a general strike by the dairy farmers, not just because of prices. They started shipping in Kraft cheese and milk to break the strike, so they robbed the train of Kraft cheese and milk. Problem solved. Third edition, just to add a little flavor. One of the brothers, my great-grandma was the second to last of 14, who went to college, asked his nephew to look after his wife while he was gone, and the nephew sure did. He got his aunt, by marriage, pregnant while my great-great-uncle was in Texas. So while I appreciate the calls for a movie, there may be some details like this that the family does not want brought into the light, lol. Story 3. When my mother admitted to the family that she had been molested as a child by her maternal grandfather, everyone was understandably shocked, sympathetic, and supportive. Except her mother, my grandma. She just said, "Oh, honey, I knew all about that." She knew her father was molesting her young daughter and did nothing. I knew my grandma wasn't a very nice person. I just didn't think she was evil. Story 4. My sister, much older and not living with us at the time, had a cat that had kittens. They were ready to go to new homes around the same time that my dad died. Me being 12 and sad really wanted to keep my favorite one, the runt of the litter. She let me have the kitten, but we both agreed to hide it from my mom as long as possible. My mom absolutely despised cats. So much so that when my sister was younger and would bring them home, she would conveniently leave the door open so they'd run away or straight up bring them to the shelter. She vehemently refused to ever allow a cat in her house. So I got away with hiding my kitty for about a week. I was a chronic after-school napper and was knocked out when she came to check in on me randomly. The kitten peeked out from under the bed and she literally screamed because she thought it was a rat at first, lol. She was pissed. She went to her room with the kitten and probably called my sister to come take it home. Surprisingly, when I went to her room like an hour later, they were just cuddling and watching TV. She did let me keep it, I assume because I was grieving at the time. But she really did enjoy that cat. Eventually, when I moved out and she moved houses, she took the cat with her. A few years after my kitty had passed away, she went out and got a new kitten all on her own accord. Like, literally without telling me. I went to visit and was like, "Whose cat is that?" And she just goes, "Oh, that's mine. His name is Squash." I never saw that coming. She still says she hates cats to this day, but she likes her cats. She's actually considering getting 2 more soon, so Squash has some friends. Story 5. When my dad admitted to spending my and my sister's portion of our mom's life insurance policy, $25,000 each, on a brand new truck. When I say our portion, I mean it was in our own secure savings account that only he had access to. and we were set to receive access when we turned 21. He did this when we were 9 and 11, only months after our mom passed, likely when he received his portion, $50,000, which was spent on renovating the house, only to sell it. Story 6. Just this past weekend, my parents, both 63 years old, were in town. They live about 5 hours away. They, my brother and his girlfriend, who is basically another sibling at this point, all came over for brunch. After we ate, my parents sat us down and said they had some very important news they needed to tell us about my dad. They built it up a lot, saying this is a big deal for them, and that they kept going back and forth about how to tell us and when would be the best time, but that they knew they had to tell us soon because it's a major deal for my dad. I 100% thought they were about to tell us that a doctor had told my dad he had 6 months to live or something. Nope. My dad, who is retired, got an offer to go back to work full-time as a consultant for 1 year. That was the news. He's going back to work for a year. I see them, maybe 5 times a year, mostly on holidays. This will not impact my relationship or experiences with my parents in the slightest, but they framed it as a huge piece of bad news they had to tell us. Story 7. My uncle has always been a bigot and not too fond of women. He's gotten much worse to my older sister now that her and her wife are expecting. It blew up last Easter when he started preaching about people choosing who they want, rather than who they should. He practically said that if a man wasn't supposed to be with a woman, every man would choose another man. There's no way any man in his right mind would choose to be with a woman if he didn't have to. After some pointed staring, he clammed up and refused to elaborate. Suddenly, the 4 failed marriages and no children made more sense, though. Edit. Spelling. Story 8. Once, I brought a kitten from the shelter to my parents. At first, Dad was vehemently against it, saying he didn't like cats. But in a very short time, less than a week, when I visited, Dad told me that the kitten is the best thing that happened to him, aside from the wedding, of course. Now I constantly remind him of how he didn't want to take Snape. Story 9. I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. TLDR. My sister gambled away around $500,000 of our mom's, actually our granddad's, money, leaving practically nothing. This is still very fresh. My mom refused to press charges and instead doubled down and went back to live with her and gave her more money. My other sister and I have been alienated because of this. My mom then passed away on April 22nd. I am not speaking to my sister, who is listed as the executor of the will. I'm sure that is the end of any inheritance I would have gotten, and I hope she has fun dealing with the legal and tax ramifications of what she did. Story 10. My parents had a relationship many would see as cool, but not too out of the ordinary for Upper New England. They were mostly nice people, church-going, took care of each other. I found out last week that when I was 7 years old, my dad had bought a gun and threatened to shoot my mom if she left after she had an affair. I learned this because last week he actually went ahead and finally shot her because he had been suppressing rage about this for over 30 years. So now out of nowhere my mom's dead, my dad is in prison. Story 11. My dad robbed a Blockbuster that he worked at when I was like 10 and didn't tell any of us. One day I called the store to talk to him to see if he could bring me home Spyro for PlayStation, and the manager asked to talk to my ma. He then proceeded to tell us that my dad robbed the store a couple of days prior and was arrested. He kept coming and leaving the house as if he was still going to work all those days. Needless to say, the divorce happened shortly after. Story 12. When I was in high school, there was a guy, Mike, in nearly all of my classes. He was nice enough, but very, very dorky. He was tall and thin, average-looking, but really a doofus. He had a huge crush on me through high school and even asked me out a couple of times. I told him no, nicely, but we remained friendly because we had a mutual friend. Once he knew I really and truly wasn't interested, Mike chased after one girl or another and was always crushing on some girl. Finally, senior year, Mike did date this girl for a bit, but things fizzled once they both went off to college. Well, I caught up with Mike about 20 years after graduation. After college, he moved to the opposite coast and no one heard from him for a while. He ended up moving back home due to some family issues, and when we met up, I was greeted with a very, very openly homosexual man. He looked fantastic. He was in amazing shape, well-groomed and well-dressed. Honestly, I barely even recognized him. He looked like a different person. He'd been in a committed relationship with another man for over a decade, was super happy and living his best life. Couldn't be happier for him, but man, you could have knocked me over with a feather. Story 13. We were planning a chill barbecue at his place, just the usual burgers and hot dogs vibe. But when we got there, the backyard was all decked out with twinkling lights, and there was this giant banner that said, "Congratulations!" Turns out my cousin had secretly planned a surprise engagement party for his girlfriend. None of us had a clue. It was a total, wow, I didn't see that one coming moment. He had organized everything himself, from the decorations to inviting all our family and friends. The best part was seeing the look on his girlfriend's face when he got down on one knee. It was priceless. I think that was the most unexpected and heartwarming surprise I've ever experienced from a relative. Story 14. My aunt told me that one time my grandparents said to her, "We love my lesbian cousin and her wife, but we just don't understand why they choose to live that lifestyle. They could both find husbands if they wanted to." My aunt explained that it wasn't a choice, and said my grandparents seemed surprised, and got it after that. The reason I put this as a "wow, I didn't see that one coming" story is because my grandparents absolutely loved my cousin and her wife. There was a family joke that they were the favorites because my grandparents always raved about how amazing they are. I was just genuinely surprised they would have said something like that. I also always think about this when people excuse old people's bigotry with, well, they grew up in a different time. My grandparents may not have completely come to terms with my cousin being a lesbian, but they always showed her and her wife love and respect. Story 15. Have, or maybe had at this point, IDK, an uncle that was relatively respected by people that knew him, active in church, teacher, outgoing with a sense of humor. Spent my entire childhood slowly redoing his house, living in the same one the whole time. Met a homeless person at a church fundraiser, food drive, community event, or whatever. Let's then stay in the garage because it was dead winter in a Midwest state. Fast forward 5 years from that decision, dude's methed out of his mind, sprinkling flour outside, trying to catch footprints and punching holes in his walls because people are living in there. 25 plus years of hard work done with his own hands undone by those same hands. Cops know him by name, but he's never done anything arrest-worthy, I guess. Lost his family, will never see his grandkids. I'm just assuming death here before he'd ever get clean. Drove one of his sons to multiple failed suicide attempts and hospital stays. Wildest thing I think we've heard from him was he got wild babbling about the cartels, and we just wrote it off as crazy person talk fueled by a meth-addled brain. But sure enough, a news story a week and a half later was about arrest made in connection with a Mexican cartel member. Quite an interesting way to spend your 60s, I guess. Story 16. Let's see. My cousin, who is also my best friend, told everyone at Thanksgiving that he was divorcing his wife. I thought that sucks, but he didn't seem to be beat up about it. He later confided in me that he was in love with the babysitter and she just happened to also be pregnant with his child. He had been sleeping with the babysitter while his wife was at work, got her pregnant, and they were going to move in together after he finalized his divorce. I just sat there in disbelief, had no idea what to say to him. Story 17. In college, I studied abroad for a year in West Africa. Rather than emailing each and every friend and family member periodically to let them know how I was doing, I opted to keep a blog. My experience there was filled with lots of highs and lows. For the most part, it was a really safe, welcoming environment. I learned a lot, made some great friendships, and got to see and do so many cool things. But the sexism, boy. Listen, things are far from perfect here. But there it was, just blatant and in your face, and I blogged about my frustrations with it. My aunt was the most stereotypical librarian you could ever imagine. Quiet, soft-spoken, introverted, very smart, but always seemed to play by the rules. She was the middle sister, and I had heard rumors of her rebellious side when she was growing up, but I'd never witnessed anything like that myself. While I was abroad, she sends me an email out of the blue talking about what I'm doing, how proud she is of me, etc. She then starts commiserating about all the sexism and says, and I quote, "If we can't expect men to control their penises, how can we expect them to run a country?" Damn, Aunt Kathy. Never saw that one coming. It's funny, too, because when Trump was elected, she turned ultra-left-wing and eventually deleted her social media for fear she'd say something to get herself arrested. So I guess that rebellious streak was there all along and just hidden while my cousin was growing up. Story 18. I was planning on moving out to live with my grandma and the rest of the family several states away. Then she, out of the middle of nowhere, dropped the bombshell that her boyfriend lays hands on her. So yeah, I'm a mix of hurt that he'd do that to her, angry at him for being an abusive POS, and disoriented having my entire life path fall apart in front of me in a matter of minutes. I've also had to immediately cut out Facebook friends after they've either posted horrific shit on their feeds or just texted me saying shit like, "Actually, I abuse animals because it's legal where I'm from. No offense." Yes, he actually said no offense in that fucking text. I've truly seen way too much, and I'm disgusted by the awful people I'm constantly surrounded by. Story 19. Not sure if favorite is the best word, but I was friends with a guy for many years. Knew his dad was super into Rush Limbaugh and shit, but my friend seemed cool. One day we're in his dad's truck, and of course he had Limbaugh on the radio, spouting some bullshit about how black people are only out to get white money. I said how stupid that is, and my friend was in total agreement with his dad, Rush, saying, "Yeah, black people just want our money." I had no idea he had those kinds of racist mentalities. Story 21 day. While hanging out at our grandparents' house, my sister asked, "Grandma, do you remember when I was born?" She said, "Yeah, you were born the same time that tornado ripped the roof off of our house." No one in the family had ever heard of that, so we called Grandpa and asked him the same question, and he said, "Of course I remember when you were born. It was the same time I was fixing our roof from that tornado." We live in Utah, we don't get tornadoes, but sure enough we looked it up, and there was a random tornado in Utah when my sister was born. Story 21. My husband didn't see this coming. We had just moved into a new house and my cat ran off as soon as we got here. My husband had to leave on a business trip and I went to animal control to find the cat. No cat, but I came home with a dog who I was asked to walk, to see how she does with new people. She ignored me the whole time but also refused to leave my side, so I brought her home. My kids were delighted, but we have her for a few days and I forgot to tell my husband about her. The kids were busy in a new school and it was a collective non-issue. The move had been traumatic and life had been up in the air for a few months. We really forgot, and when we spoke, he was more worried about the utilities being on and the new neighbors, etc. My husband got home in the middle of the night, and I got a phone call from the entryway. "There is a dog staring at me, and I am in a corner. Come get me right now." I went downstairs and he was standing by the door with his luggage and laptop. He hadn't even taken off his coat. Our new dog was thumping her tail, patiently staring at him. Whenever he moved, she bared her teeth. No barking, no drama. We suspected that if he made any progressive motion, she would neatly dispatch him, and I would need to deal with his body. I went to my husband and kissed him, and our dog, a chow mix, was all happiness. My husband picked her up and carried her upstairs. She was an animated teddy bear, playful and silly. She was the best dog we ever had. My husband totally understood how we forgot to tell him, partly because she was so stealthy and quiet. It was easy to forget she was there, unless she felt talkative, then her inner husky came out. Story 22. My dad and grandmother, both fully retired, were talking a road trip to visit some family. It's about 18-20 hours. I'm almost halfway, so they were staying here a night. The plan was to drive up the day after my birthday, stay the night, and leave early the next day. I asked my dad if they wanted to come up a day or two early and spend my birthday with me. I didn't even think there would be any hesitation since neither of them had shit else going on. He said he'd talk to my grandmother and get back to me. Okay, totally normal thing to say. Then he calls back the next day and literally said, "We're not interested," and that was that. I am still, about a month later, totally mind blown. WTF. Story 23. When I was 6, my family moved in 2 houses down from a kid a couple years older than me that I became very good friends with. We would hang out almost every day for a decade or so, go hunting, go on trips together and stuff. Our families were very close as well. He was kind of an awkward guy, not bad looking, but never had luck with the ladies. One day he meets a girl online and moves across the country to live with her, which I thought was odd, but attributed it to his lack of experience with women. About a year later, a headline pops up on Facebook with a mugshot of him. He got charged with possession of CP and distribution of pics of his girlfriend's 5-year-old daughter and sentenced to life without parole. Dumb motherfucker was sharing that shit in social media back channels. Never saw it coming. This guy would make comments about shooting pedos on sight and all that. Now most of my memories from the ages of 10, 21 are tainted with the reality of what that monster would become. At least he's where he needs to be now. Story 24. Oh, this is fun. My grandmother, Dad's mom, hired people to ruin my parents' marriage. Of course, nobody knew what she did in the beginning. My mom would receive death threats from random people, and my grandma kept setting up situations to tempt my mother to cheat on my dad to rock their worlds. Thankfully, she didn't. During all that, my dad got random tips telling him my mom was cheating on him. It got so bad that while I was in school, these people would talk to me randomly and tell me to inform my mom to be careful. The police got involved, and there was a major investigation. Those people who were hired were all jailed, and the police gotten to know that the mastermind of it all is my grandmother. My mom didn't press any charges to my dad's mother, though. My parents just decided to move to another country. That was 24 years ago. My dad's family is still as shit as they could be, but at least we're far from them. Story 25. My grandfather is the kind of man who managed to become rich but started with humble origins. I grew up with stories about how he started with literally nothing, and slowly growing up, the kind of, with effort, you can achieve everything. Like how he would ride his bicycle from sun to sundown to buy cigarettes in the city and sell them on his village. I didn't notice the clues as a kid, but looking back, it didn't make sense all the wealth coming from a humble bike repair shop in such small place. That was until recent years. With age, he lost all filters and started to tell me all the shit he did, the wild stories about my father, and how he would bribe the cops in the area to look the other way.